what I might do before we actually get jumped into any sort of questions is actually introduce Laura, Tara and Emily, and I'll let them explain who they are, and I'll give you 60 seconds, I reckon, to explain, I guess, what you did at school for your project and where you are at the moment.
Okay, so my name's Emily. I'm a first-year education student at Flinders, and I completed my research project last year as a Year 12, and my topic was whether we should assimilate Indigenous students into urban boarding schools or whether we should improve the educational outcomes offered in rural communities. So.
Hey guys, I'm Tara. I graduated from Sacred Heart in 2013 when I completed my research project then, and I'm currently studying education in my second year. I did my research project on anxiety and how it impacts academic performance.
Hi, so my name is Laura. I studied at Banksia Park International High School, and I graduated in 2013, and I did my research project in my Year 12, so that was 2 years ago, and I'm 2 years into my Bachelor of Criminology.
Cool, thank you guys. So 3 quite different projects, and also guys from different schools as well, so probably gone through very different processes. One of the biggest things, so you've all said that, a lot of you, sorry, have said that you haven't actually started yet, so one of the biggest processes you're going to go through is actually getting it started. And it's finding something that you're genuinely interested and passionate about that you want to research, and it might be something that you can't do as a subject at school, and it might be something you're really interested in that you can't maybe do as part of your curriculum that you can actually study and actually get assessed for and actually get credit for. And the other thing too that you're going to be wanting to be looking at is working out if that's something you can research properly or big enough. So I guess getting started is one of the biggest things. And when we're talking with some of you girls about your own projects, I know Tara, you've had a lot, you've got your big folio book that you've been showing to everyone. What advice did you get about getting started?
So for getting started, I basically, brainstormed areas of interest that I had and looked at them quite broadly. So I've always been interested in psychology. So I had a couple of topics that, within psychology I thought would be interested in. So I was thinking of something to do with forensic psychology and something to do with anxiety or depression or something like that. The first thing I did before choosing was I did a quick Google search on different, I just typed in forensic psychology. I even just looked at the number of Google results that came up and just had a quick look of how good those sources were. And then I did another search on anxiety and also looked at anxiety and school performance. And I found that I had a lot more credible information from that. So that's why I went towards anxiety and academic performance. And I also had access to a lot of people to talk to, because obviously at the school itself I could have talked to teachers and students about stress and how that impacts school performance. So the prior research before choosing your topic is a really good idea, otherwise you'll get halfway through and you might run out of sources. That would be my tip for that.
Did you get advice from school on looking at those topics?
As a whole, yeah, I talked to my teacher about the couple of topics I had in mind, and then she pointed me in the direction of how far I could go with that as a whole, and how she thought that maybe I could point it in a specific direction so that's not too broad and I'm left out in the cold.
Okay. What about yours, Laura? Because I know that's quite a big topic to look at. So.
Yeah, so I probably forgot to mention, but my research project focused on animals in captivity, and choosing my topic was the hardest part for me. I had a horrible time choosing my topic. So people kept saying to me, choose something you're interested in, choose something that you're passionate about. And the more people kept saying that, the more I kept forgetting what I liked and what I was passionate about, and I just had no idea. And I ended up choosing animals in captivity, literally because we went to the zoo with biology. And I think it was the last week that we could decide. So I'd done all of the brainstorming and it wasn't working, it wasn't coming together, but eventually it kind of came to me. But it was a really difficult process. So if you do struggle, don't worry, you will get there. You might just have to choose something a bit randomly.
For me, it was very much based on, again, a prior school experience. So I had an opportunity with school to go to the Northern Territory and experience life in a rural Indigenous community for a few days. And the educational gap that exists between rural Indigenous students and what I had seen and experienced at St Ignatius was just so vast and really got to me a little bit. So when I got back and started thinking about my research project, it was really, what do I want to do in the future, potentially looking at teaching or law, and then how can I make this into a research project that I can study, because it's just such a complex area, and I think it's about narrowing it down. So Indigenous education and the gap is such a massive issue. So then I needed to go, right, where can I define the scope of this so I have enough information to do the project successfully, as Tara said, but not be too broad that my information is going to be all over the place and I don't have a succinct answer. So that was really important.
So something that's quite important that Emily actually just touched on then is around the scope of your project, and that's something you're probably going to work with your teachers a little bit on. It's quite important because you want to, like I said at the start, have something that you've got enough information to research on, but not be too broad, that you've got too much to be able to try and digest. So refining the scope can be quite important. So Emily mentioned a bit about how she's done with hers. How did you go about doing yours, either Laura or Tara? Because I know that they can be quite big topics, and defining that, I guess.
I kind of touched on that a bit before, but when I was just saying I'm just going to do my project on anxiety, and then I was just going to have a field day, but then I realised that that was so broad, and then I would have just kind of got lost in all the information. So then my teacher was kind of talking to me about, well, there are all sorts of things that anxiety impacts. So I could have looked at how it impacted sleep or how it... So she really spoke to me about refining that down even further. And so then when I thought about academic performance, I thought about how I know that stress impacts my academic performance. So I thought I chose something that would actually then benefit me. So I went in a direction that I knew would benefit me in the future and in my studies outside of the research project. And then I also refined it down to that specific topic because I had access to teachers and students, and I was able to survey the whole school because they're obviously pursuing like academic endeavours, so they know all about that sort of thing. So that's probably how I refined it.
And how'd you go with yours, Laura, looking at animals in captivity?
Yeah, so when I started researching it, I found, so originally my focus question was about animals in captivity in Australia, but that was too narrow. Often people have problems with it being too broad, but mine was too narrow, and there was just no research. And I got halfway through my research and I had to change my whole question and reorganise it all because there was no research at all about it from an Australian perspective. So I had to open it up to a global kind of perspective and see how animals were treated in zoos across the world and how it could relate to Australia. Yeah, so that was a bit of a problem. It was a challenge that I faced again.
Is that something that teachers are able to help with a little bit, or anyone in those fields?
Yeah, so my research project teacher was amazing and she helped me broaden it but not make it too broad. So it's just like a fine balance, you know, it's like too broad or too narrow. Yeah, so when I changed my question too, I had to kind of change my sources, and that's when I tried to contact some academics in animal behaviour. But unfortunately, because I had to change the question, it was kind of a bit late, and by the time I needed the responses, I hadn't gotten any. So that's also a challenge you might face, getting your primary resources. If no one responds to you, that's a big issue. So I managed to overcome that by creating my own survey and again kind of rechanging my question to focus on the general public's perspective of zoos. So my question changed a lot and my research changed a lot, but I got there.
So I think it's probably something to take away from all of that, from all three, is actually getting that question right. And I guess it doesn't matter if you don't get the right straight away, but drafting that with your teachers or going back over that and refining what you're looking at. So Laura's, for example, had to be broadened, whereas the other two girls have had to look at theirs and define that even more. So narrow that down so that you've got the right scope for your project. And remembering as well that you're going to have a certain amount of time to complete that in and how long it's going to be. Once you've actually got that question set, the next big thing that's going to be quite different from other projects you've probably done and other topics is actually getting a lot of those primary and secondary sources. And that might mean using things like academic or scholarly articles for the first time. That might be quite different to other ones. It might be going out and doing things like interviews or surveys. And maybe using a combination of those to actually research quite widely. So something that's quite different for that would be actually using those type of things. So how did you guys find that? Using these different types of sources and using that for the first time?
Yeah, so for me, I think just going back to that last point as well, I think it's really important to be flexible with your research project. So none of us had our question at the start that was the same question at the end. You know, I really had no idea where I wanted to take my project until I got, you know, maybe halfway through when I was gathering my resources. And yeah, so for me, when I was doing that sort of research process, I started with just finding papers on Indigenous education and highlighting what the issues were. So whether it was funding, whether it was resources, teacher attention, what were the issues that were facing the rural communities, and then from there I could narrow my research down into a few key areas that I found important. So I found teachers and relationships to be quite important, as well as funding, as well as community support and where students can learn best. So from these scholarly articles that I found via Google Scholar is a really good source, as well as Google Books. I don't know if anyone's ever told you this sneaky trick, and the teachers might disagree with me to some extent, but from my experience, if you use Google Books, because it's a print source that has just been photocopied and put online, you can actually reference it as though you referenced a book. So you know those assignments when they say you have to use 5 books, you use Google Books, and I referenced all of those as print sources because they technically are. So we had Google Scholar, Google Books. I also had a look at a lot of government sites, so the ABS, Kevin Rudd's Closing the Speech Gap, and then from there I contacted different schools and different people to interview. So I tried to keep my resources nice and broad, but it's really important to understand that every topic's going to be quite different, and so if you're doing a very hands-on project, or whether you're constructing something as your outcome, obviously your research and your research project process is going to be quite different. So.
Yeah, I think with mine, before I even brainstormed what areas I'd look into, I actually, even at the start of my kind of big folio, I've done a couple of just broad pages on anxiety from a health website. I looked at all that, and then I used that information to make a big brainstorm kind of mind map of areas I could research, and I got a lot of information from those sources to put then on my brainstorm. But then I also made a brainstorm about qualitative resources that I could find. So I wrote down, all the different people I could possibly interview. When I found out that for the research project you were going to have to actually talk to people, that was something I thought, it's going to be impossible to do. But I was actually able to just email quite a few different academics from Flinders, even from Beyond Blue, and they'd send back some really great information. And Flinders actually has a website called Find an Expert, which I didn't know about, so I kind of went a roundabout way of trying to find different experts. I had to read articles to find who to talk to. But on the Flinders website, under Find an Expert, you can just type in a search bar. You can start specific around your research question, like I could have typed in anxiety and academic performance, and if you don't get anything, then broaden it a bit and just type in, say, anxiety, and then you'll get a whole list of academics that come up that have anything to do with that area. Their emails will pop up, and you can email one of them or all of them. Probably best email all of them, because then you can email them all the same questions, but then what you're going to get back is going to be a lot greater than just if you email one of them. So that's a really good source that I wish I knew about, I guess, when I was doing my research project.
When you're looking at that kind of stuff, Tara,